Okay, everybody, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. I'm not going to talk about the hostage exchange. That is a whole other topic. I'm personally not major in favor of the deal that's being made, but that's not our subject for tonight. I hope that if it's going to be made, I hope it works out well, and we will see. No more comments on that for now. But I have picked a relatively dangerous topic to discuss. Who rules in Judaism, the men or the women? And yes, I already received a number of threats that I better answer the way the majority of people tuning in here think I should, but I will try to elaborate on it a bit. Unfortunately, I don't have a bulletproof vest to wear because they're all being used by the Army. So I obviously have to answer the way that most people think I will. I know all the jokes, quite used to all the jokes that were big in the beginning of the feminist movement. My wife told me to stand here. You all know that one. Eve was a prime rib. A woman's place is in the House and in the Senate. So I know all of those cute little jokes, but we're going to try to examine it from a Torah point of view. And a lot of what we need to say about the subject is found in this Parsha of Vayetze. To begin with, we could see the predominance of women from the birth of the 12 tribes, the Shvatim, because essentially, other than with one exception, they're all born during this week's Parsha. In fact, we have 12 births. One of them is Dinah. So we have 11 of the 12 tribes born in Parshat Vayetze. And essentially, they all focus around the mother and not the father. The first few, because Rachel is Akara, she's barren. So the first few births are all about Leah. And they revolve strictly around Leah's situation because she is in a kind of loveless marriage with Yaakov because of the circumstances. He thinks he's marrying, we'll get to there later, he thinks he's marrying Rachel, he marries Leah. So all of these different names are really personal feelings and emotions of Leah. Ruvain, from the word re'u, to see, that Hashem will see my suffering. Already, even with the first child, she already feeling very despondent. Then the second child, Shimon, from the word Shema, or the Shmoa, that Hashem hears that I am unloved now that I have a second child, so maybe my husband will love me. Then the third child, Levi. Now we think about Levi, which, and it has different connotations, this name, but Levi, more than Reuven or Shimon, has a very exalted place in Jewish life. The Levim, the Kohanim, in a sense, being the elite. And yet, this name of Levi derives from the fact that she says, from the word Levi connected to the word livui, which means an accompaniment, or someone who will be at your side. And she says, now my husband will accompany me and be attached to me. The idea behind that, of course, is that when she has her first child, she can hold Reuven in her right hand. When she has the second, she can hold Shimon at the same time in her left hand, but she only has two hands. So now when she has her third, she's going to need help. And therefore, Yaakov's not going to have any choice but to accompany her wherever she has to go with that third child. So in a sense, it's really kind of sad, almost pathetic, that these names are not reflecting any kind of grandeur, but they're reflecting her mindset because she considers herself unloved. And then comes Rachel. She still can't have children, but she has a maidservant, Bilhah. And so from Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali are born. And again, They are also reflecting, without getting into all of the meanings behind the names, but they are also reflecting the women's own personal life and what's happening to them vis-a-vis their husband or vis-a-vis their situation. And even though we can extrapolate, from Don to Judge, they're all beautiful names, nevertheless, they all come from the perspective of the woman, of the mother. From Zilpah, who is the maidservant given to Leah, we have Gad and Asher, Yisachar and Zebulun. And then Yosef, of course, comes from Rachel. And there too, the name deals with Rachel's situation. One of the meanings of Yosef from the word lahosif, to add, is that she prays Hashem will give her a second child even as soon as she has her first. A lot of women might say while they're giving birth, they're not thinking about having their next child, but certainly Rachel was. So all of the children are named by the mothers, and some of them have a bit of a portent to the future. Yehuda, for example, although it's based on Leah saying, now I really can give thanks to Hashem, from the word Todah, because if they had seen that they had foreseen 12 tribes through 4 women, 12 divided by 4 is 3, so each of them would ostensibly get 3. So when she has her 4th, she says, I have been given more than my share, etc. That's a whole other beautiful idea of giving thanks. The only child that a husband gets to name is Binyamin in next week's Parsha, and that is only after his mother dies and Yaakov changes the original name, which had been given to him by Rachel. One of the great Torah trivia questions, that this is a change of name from Ben Oni to Binyamin. But I want to look at something else and explore with you a lot deeper the bigger picture of women, at least reflected in the Torah, in terms of their strengths and their influence on everything that happens in Judaism. We start with Abraham. Now, Abraham wants to let Ishmael remain in the tent because, after all, he is Abraham's firstborn, and this is firstborn son. This is a big deal. And so he has certainly every reason to want to have Ishmael there. Ishmael's mother, Hagar, is a princess. She's not just a simple person. And in fact, we know she will be connected to Abraham for the rest of her life. If you accept that Keturah is really Hagar, so then there is this lifelong connection between the two of them. So he wants Ishmael there, but Sarah knows better. And Sarah sees that the corrosive effect of this wild, danger-seeking Ishmael on the reserved and pensive, God-fearing Yitzchak could very well corrupt him. She envisions that happening even from, he's older, of course, Ishmael, but even from the very beginning when Yitzchak is born, she sees this will not end right. And therefore she demands that Ishmael be banished from the tent. And we all know that Susie and all the other women named Sarah, Janice is there, and others, this famous verse they love to quote, Kol asher tomar ilecha Sarah shma b'kola, that Hashem intervenes and says, listen to her, she knows better than you, and so Ishmael indeed is banished. Now Yitzchak, in a pretty astonishing irony and repeat of history, he sees his own firstborn, Esav, as a rugged, assertive, powerful young man, very different from his introverted self. And he envisions that he is someone who can protect the family from the many physical challenges and dangers that await us throughout history. So Yitzchak is quite taken with his firstborn son, Esav. And perhaps because Yitzchak went along faithfully but meekly to his seeming own demise at the Akedah, when he suspected he might be the offering, perhaps he sees in Esav someone who is aggressive and bold, who will not be pushed around. So Yitzchak, although we like to say he's blind, he doesn't know what's happening, and that's certainly one way of looking at it, but we can also say that Yitzchak, he was a Navi, and maybe he foresaw all the dangers that are going to exist in the future. And so he wants children and grandchildren to be very strong. And that is one of the traits of Esau. But Rivka sees it otherwise. And she is not only prophetic, but she's also streetwise, and very much like her mother-in-law, Sarah. And she understands that Yaakov, though he is a scholar and not a hunter like Esau, he has not only the spiritual strength and aptitude that most defines what Jewish character really is, but he can rise to the physical occasion when he has to. When it's necessary, he demonstrates that he also has big muscles, right? He has gumption, gumption as well. He lifts that boulder off the well when single-handedly, when they're waiting for the shepherds to gather to together lift it. He lifts it off when he sees he's given this tremendous burst of energy when he sees Rachel, and he uncovers the well, pulls off the rock. He stands up to Lavan, shows a lot of courage there, and he bests the angel in the epic wrestling match that's coming up. So he does have some things going for him as well. And so Rivka, she is absolutely determined that Yaakov and not Esav, he's going to be the standard bearer. He's going to be the one to lead Am Yisrael and not Esav. And she doesn't strong arm her husband. She's a bit different than Sarah in that respect. She follows through on what she believes, but she does it a little differently. She brilliantly orchestrates the situation so that Yaakov emerges ultimately with the appropriate bracha, but still following in the same pattern of knowing what's best for the family, what's best for Jewish history. And now we come to Rachel in our Sedra, and she's going to take her rightful place among the Imahot as well. She too manipulates the family dynamics in order to guide history where she believes it has to go. She and Leah plot who will marry Yaakov, as well as deciding who Yaakov will sleep with on any given night. We have the story of the Dudaim in the Parsha, that Reuven finds the Dudaim, and he gives it to his mother Leah, and apparently it has certain aphrodisiacal qualities to it. And Rachel, who's having trouble getting pregnant, she wants those Dudaim. Some say they were figs, some say they were mandrakes, and various other possibilities. But in any case, she is determined to have them, but Leah has them. So Rachel trades. What can she trade for the Dudaim? She trades 2 nights with Yaakov that she would be scheduled to sleep with him, and she gives that to Leah. Yaakov has no say in this whatsoever, and actually from these 2 nights are born 2 of her children, if you know who they are, Yisachar and Zvulun, which is interesting because they will also have, just like she had a pact with Leah, so Yisachar and Zvulun have this famous pact where Yisachar is the scholar, Zvulun is the seagoing businessman who is able to support the study of Yisachar, etc. And so that's the result of the 2 of them getting together and deciding will be the ones to determine who Yaakov's going to sleep with tonight. Now, I want to come back for a moment to the original story of the marriage that takes place in this week's Parsha. It's very, very fascinating. Rachel has this conversation with Yaakov. She warns him that her father Lavan is a very tricky fellow, and clearly you can see that the apple is not falling far from the tree. She tells him outright, you know, my father, he's a Ramai, he's a con man, he's very, very skilled and clever and can be very underhanded, and he's going to try to fool you, she says to Yaakov. So Yaakov says, not to worry, I'm his match, I can handle him. So Rachel says, but hang on a second, you're a tzaddik. What do you know? You know, you sit in the tents, you learn. what do you know about deviousness and deception? So Yaakov gives an answer, and this is quoted in Tehillim, Perek Yud Chet, the 18th chapter of Tehillim, and he says, Im Navar Tit, very, very controversial statement that David HaMelech makes. Im Navar Titbarer, Ve'im Ikesh Titpatel. With those who are pure, act purely, act righteously. But with those who are crooked, feel free to act ruthlessly. Very interesting statement coming from Yaakov. So he says, I can best your father. He's tricky, but I can be tricky too. But in the end, as we know, Yaakov is fooled and marries Leah instead of Rachel. What happened here? Yaakov is quite shocked because we're told by the commentators that Yaakov had given a password to Rachel, right? He suspected that Laban might pull a fast one, and therefore he said to Rachel, I'm going to give you a password that you'll be able, in case for some reason I can't see you. The password, by the way, as some of you may know, is Hachein, Hey Chet Nun, which stand for the three specific mitzvot given to women, Hadlakat Nerot, Chala, and Nida. So as we say, Sheker Hachein Vehevel Hayofi. So in other words, if a woman is not living up to and performing those mitzvot, then no matter how beautiful she is, there's still something lacking. But he gives her that password, so he would be sure that she is the one under the veil in the room. And indeed, it was darkened by Lavan, says the Medrash. He turned off all the lights. It's very romantic. Maybe that's why there's custom of having candles. So a lot of different reasons for having candles at a wedding when you walk down the aisle. But one of the reasons may be that in this famous wedding, so it was dark, and she is wearing a very thick veil. So Yaakov doesn't really see her face. Nevertheless, what happens? Rachel gives the password to Leah, so that if he says, who is that under the veil? So the voice comes back and says, Hachein, and knows the password that it's supposed to be Rachel. Not only that, according to the commentators, Rachel even hid under the bed that they were sleeping in, Yaakov and Leah, in order to speak to Yaakov and further fool him, to use her voice. So it sounded like that was Leah. And no, do not ask me what she said. I have no idea, nor do I even want to guess what she whispers from under the bed, so that Yaakov believes that it is Rachel and not Leah. But why did Rachel do it? We know that she loved Yaakov. That's a kind of first instance in the Torah of love at first sight. So we know that she loves him. Maybe it was because she took pity on her older sister, and maybe the custom there really was, as Lavan claimed later, that it's not proper to marry the younger before the older. Or more likely, I would say, she had a sense of Ruach HaKodesh that Leah was also destined to marry Yaakov, that Leah needed to marry Yaakov, that Leah would produce half of the Shvatim, and that was the way God wanted it to turn out. She would also get to marry Yaakov, and maybe she saw that as well, but she was willing to take that chance and to allow Leah to marry her beloved Yaakov, and she cooperated fully in that. But whatever the reason, she did what she believed was good for history, even if it seemed duplicitous to Yaakov. Now, in the morning, when Yaakov discovers what has happened, so he angrily confronts Rachel, and he says to her, how could you do this to me? We had it all worked out. You had a password, and you double-crossed me. Where did you get the chutzpah? Where did you get the nerve to do that? So Rachel answers with a sharpness that cements Yaakov right in his place, so he can't move at all, to put it mildly. And what does she say? I learned it from you, Yaakov. You switch places with Esav, and I switch places with Leah. And Yaakov doesn't have any word to say about it. He is just frozen, in a sense, by the sharpness of Rachel. So in all of these different cases we see, one after the other, it is really the women who are guiding. Men, obviously, they're in a frontal position. They are the ones maybe who get the notoriety. But the truth is that we see from these stories that really the women are the heart and the soul of what the family is all about and the values they have, and ultimately being able to decide the right path for them to take and who is going to lead the family. And these are really the all-important decisions that have to be made within the family. And more often than not, they're going to be made by the women, as we see. One more proof, kind of affirming that women really are setting the tone, and women are the ones that deserve the true recognition, even if it's not done in public. The next generational story is that of the brothers, right? The whole family unit breaks down when sibling rivalry gets totally out of hand and violence results between the Shvatim. Yaakov not only fails to manage the situation, but according to the Gemara, he actually exacerbates it by showing favor to Yosef rather than keeping him humble. He has a few words to say to Yosef, but he also favors him, and that certainly increases the animosity that the other brothers already feel towards him. So the resulting trauma of Yosef's sale almost destroys the royal family, because one thing is missing in the story, and that is the fact that Rachel is not present. Rachel has already died. Leah is not a very forceful, take charge person among the imahot. Certainly she's the least of the four. And Rachel's not there. Had Rachel been there, I think it's safe to assume that this very well might not have happened. And finally, I want to just say a word about one central theme that seems to run through all of these different stories, and one element that absolutely raises these women to the top of the ladder, to the top of the mountain, and that is the sense of Mesirat Nefesh, the willingness to sacrifice, this idea of being Moser Nefesh, to sacrifice perhaps what was good for them or what would have made them personally happy, to give anything and everything up for the good of the family. And that's something that reverberates through all these stories of the great women. Abraham and Yitzchak, they survived the Akedah, and their life will go on. Sarah does not. She dies, we are told, at the Akedah. Rivka, as her name implies, because Rivka can be read Rivaka, one who is single or alone. So Rivka dies, and she is indeed buried alone. No one will be at her funeral except the undertaker. Esav is not there. Yaakov has run away. Her husband is gone, etc. And her husband is blind, sorry. And Rachel, of course, as we said, dies the youngest of all the imahot. So when we put all that together, we see that this is the essential component of doing anything and everything in order to see that the family succeeds and that Jewish history goes on. It's not to say that the men are not courageous, that the men don't have their input, but there is a difference. They don't, and indeed there are many men who also are Moser Nefesh, and we see that in history as well. But I think it's the women who set the tone and who are, it's a mixture of courage and humility to be able to say, maybe what I'm doing is not what I would personally like to happen, but it's nevertheless necessary for the family to survive. And you see that reflected in the story of all these women and many more women in history as well. You see it certainly in terms of Esther, who's a tremendous Moser Nefesh, in the story of Purim. And without going into all the different examples. So I think the bottom line is that we all want appreciation, but I think we have to have a special appreciation for the great women of Jewish history. So I'm going to stop. I want to conclude for us to read this prayer for the Shvuyim, for the captives, and to hope that if this deal does go through, that all of them will be able to ultimately be freed and will be able to rehabilitate after certainly the trauma that they've gone through. At the same time that the initial, and I think the most important goal of the war, which is to defeat this terrible enemy, the Amaleki Nazi terrorists, subhuman terrorists of Hamas, that we return to that as soon as possible, as difficult and traumatic as that is, in order for our Chayalim HaKadoshim to finish the job, because ultimately, I think that is the primary goal. Mishaberach Abateinu Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo. Hu yivarech v'yishmor v'yinsor et achenu Beit Yisrael hashavuyim. Ba'avur sha'anu mitpalalim ba'avuram. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim alehem yishmereim mikol tzara b'tzukah u'mikol nega u'machala v'yishlach bracha v'atzlacha b'chol masei dehem yotzi'eim mechoshech v'tzalmavet v'yishivei mehera l'chek mishpachotehem v'nomar amen. And a final word that I saw, I think I may have mentioned this, I didn't do it last week, it bears repeating, that I forget who it was, one of the Rabbanim, who actually said something very, very useful, and that is several times a day, we are saying the phrase Matir Asurim. We're blessing God as one who frees those who are hostages. To concentrate on that phrase when we say it in the Shemona Esrei, when we say it in the Brachot, and just stop for a moment and think, specifically have kavana for those who are held captive in Gaza. Matir Asurim, Hashem should free them. We should hear good news, B'sarot Tovot. Our soldiers should be successful and stay healthy and well, and that Hashem should be with us and deliver us, so that ultimately we can go on and accomplish all the things that we are meant to do. Everybody have a Shabbat Shalom. Look forward to seeing you next week, Thursday, same time, same place. For those of you who still remember something called Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. It's always, as Rav Moshe said, it's always a good thing to give thanks. After all, that's what the word Yehudi comes from, lehodot, to give thanks. So to be a Jew is to give thanks for all the fantastic things that we have in life. So happy Thanksgiving, however you celebrate it or don't. And see you next week. Shabbat Shalom V'rach.